In the Counterstorytelling project, you're going to be challenged to look at the non-dominant narrative in a society. In every society, two narratives exist. One is the dominant, one is the non-dominant. You've actually been reading about a counter-storytelling in the Irving book as she shows her narrative to begin with, the narrative she believes that is the truth, the one that she has grown up with, the one that has dominated her life. And then as she begins to have sort of a cultural awakening and begins to understand that there are people that are different than her out there and that life doesn't always look this way, she starts to encounter that counter narrative, right? That non-dominant narrative. You've also seen this in the Coates book. And he is telling the perspective from the counter narrative the entire time with sort of little flips back and forth to the dominant to show how the dominant impacts the non-dominant. In both of these situations, we see these two narratives butting heads. We see where a person learns one side of the narrative and perhaps doesn't have all of the information that they need to see that there are other narratives out there. So in your counter-storytelling project, what you're going to do is look for that non-dominant narrative. So you have a couple of ways to do this. If you have a friend or someone that you know that you're willing to interview, I believe that's the best way to do it because you get a really good opportunity to have a tough conversation. You get a chance to ask questions. You get a chance to have open dialogue about the differences in narratives. Another way is you can actually read a narrative account of a situation, one that doesn't focus on the perspective of the dominant. And in this case, we're speaking of the dominant being white, middle-class American. So any place where you're going to be looking at something that is different than a white middle-class American, you'll be able to use that as your narrative. Now keep in mind, we're thinking about race and ethnicity in this course. So don't focus on somebody who has a different socioeconomic background. That's not going to be applicable for this project because we're thinking about race and ethnicity. Although different socioeconomics does play into race and ethnicity and those factors also. So as you're going through this, you'll see on the screen the details that and background section that I'm asking you to cover. So basically in the very first thing, and all of the listings of pages are just suggestions. Because in the past what I've found is that people kind of go way over in this project instead of way under. So I want you to keep in mind that not that less is more, but basically tell your story, get your information out. Don't exceed the page numbers that I've given you as your guidelines. So in one page or less, you're going to describe the situation or event in which the interview occurred. So you can give me a little bit of background about the person, about the situation did you do it online? What were the questions that you asked of the person? Keeping it very simple so that I can understand the context of how the interview went down. If you're reading an article or you're reading an account or viewing an account from a person of a different color, then you're going to have to explain that. Explain where you found the account, how the account presented itself to you, what drew you to that account, and what questions are you considering while you're reading the account. So if you end up doing an interview or reading an interview, or watching something that will give you your perspective, you're still going to have to create some questions, thinking about what are some questions that you have after you read it or after you watch it, or what are some of the questions that you would like to ask one of the main characters that you're watching or that you're reading about. So I want an in-depth then who was interviewed, why they re-interviewed, giving me some more information just about the format of the interviewing and explaining your process in detail. So that should all be done within the first 2 pages together, description and overview of the research process. The two narratives, again, let me stress, is the dominant narrative. So that's the white middle-class America. That's the one that we are used to seeing all the time. So you're really going to have to dig in deep, especially if you are a white middle-class American in this course. You're going to have to dig in deep and think about what parts of this are the narrative that we truly see, like Deb Irving did, and then what parts of the narrative are just whitewashed. What things happen that I don't know about just because I'm a white middle-class American woman, what are the things that I don't understand because it's all been whitewashed for me. So in that section with the two narratives, you're going to go through and tell the story of the person that you interviewed. You're going to do some comparatives, looking at what their story is and what the story is that we typically learn, maybe even your own personal story. So in this counter storytelling project, it is perfectly fine to refer to yourself. You don't have to say the researcher or the interviewer. You can totally refer to yourself as I, because I want this to be a personal experience for you. So in this section here, you're going to be telling the story, the things that you learned from the person, but you're also going to be doing those comparatives. So these are some of the questions that I wrote, like how does it challenge dominance or the dominant narrative? So you can give an example of what the dominant narrative was and explain how it challenges that. And also, like, how does the existing dominant narrative minimize that counter narrative, that counter story that you're learning? So how has it been that that dominant narrative that we all know has kind of pushed out or whitewashed the other narrative? And then finally, the end of this is going to be sort of your analysis of how this pulls together into the course and what is your learning from doing the counter storytelling project, from having that interview experience, from learning about what we've learned about in the course. And you can use any of the course materials, of course. I would venture to say that the Irving and the Coates books are really going to be strong for you. The Singleton book will help you also whenever you're discussing just what the courageous conversation is in regards to this. And most importantly, just because whenever we get to the end, a lot of people end up leaving off their reference page, please make sure you have that reference page. I will email you if it's missing, because I would hate for you to not have that in this project, but make sure that you include those reference pages. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me, but I hope that this helps you to dig a little bit deeper as you start to think about what your counter storytelling project is going to be about.